Juror number 129. I'm going to release you from this jury. And you don't have to worry about being called up on other juries because your jury service is ended completely. Unless we, 4 years from now or so, send you a summons, but until then, you are free to go.
Okay, thank you very much.
And the deputy will take some paperwork from you. All right. Do you want to start on another juror, or should we take our break right now?
Maybe we'll take our break.
Let's take a little more till 1:45. All right. We'll reconvene at 10:45. I have to discuss some camera issues as well. Thank you. No. next juror is on his way. All right, come up, have a seat. And you are juror 130, is that correct?
Yep.
All right. First of all, I'm going to swear you in because all your answers have to be under oath. So if you could raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that you will truthfully answer all questions about your qualifications to serve as a juror?
I do.
All right, thank you. Okay, we have plexiglass between us, and I'm going to keep my mask on. Plexiglass in front of you, plexiglass in front of the lectern where the lawyers are going to be asking you questions, which is a distance away. My conclusion of all that is, if you want to remove your mask for comfort or to be able to be heard more clearly, feel free to do so.
Okay.
If you want to leave it on, also fine. I'll pretty much leave it to you.
Okay.
In either case, mask or no mask, need you kind of near the microphone so that we can hear everything you say.
All right.
And so far, it seems to be just fine. So, but just keep that in mind. Well, first of all, before I turn over the attorneys, a couple questions I have. First of all, you filled out a questionnaire, and thank you for taking the time to do that. Gave us a lot of good information to start with. Is everything true on that questionnaire?
Yes.
Anything that you wanted to change or add to what was on the questionnaire?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. It usually comes up when the lawyers are asking you questions from the questionnaire, and they will usually read the question and also read your answer, not to be confrontational, but just to refresh your memory about what your answer was.
Okay.
And if there is something additional or different, feel free to volunteer that.
All right.
The bottom line is I want you to feel comfortable giving an answer that is different from what's in the questionnaire. Because we understand with the passage of time you might have thought of other things you should have included, or that something was not accurate, or maybe even your opinions have evolved. So it's all right to be different than what's in the question.
Okay.
All right. Also, you're not supposed to read any articles or any media, pay any attention to the news about this case or any related cases. But we understand with the passage of a few months, inadvertently you might be exposed to something. Either, a quick blurb on the TV news, or a headline, or maybe even talking to a friend who tells you something. And since we told you don't tell anybody you're a potential juror, you can't exactly stop them.
Yeah.
So, anything like that that you've been inadvertently exposed to about this case, related cases, anything?
The only thing I heard was about, I had some coworkers talking about the settlement with the city.
Okay.
I tried to avoid the conversation. I didn't speak to them about it, but I heard some details about it. Not sure everything that happened, but I did hear some banter about that. That's about
Okay. Did you hear any amounts or anything like that?
No.
Okay. Did you hear their opinions about the amounts?
I don't think so. I think they were
Okay.
just kind of talking about it in general.
So as far as the substance of what you may have learned about this case or the related civil case, basically that there was a settlement, nothing more than that, or was there a little more detail than that?
I just heard that the city had come to a settlement with the family of George Floyd. That's about all I heard.
All right. And how do you think that's going to affect you as being a juror in this case?
I don't think it will really affect me. I don't know much about what happened, but
Right.
yeah, I don't think it will really affect me. I didn't hear enough details really.
Okay. Well, let me put it this way. The settlement is not a part of this case. You won't hear evidence about it because it's not a part of this case. Separate case, separate parties, separate legal issues, separate decisions by the city, who's not a party to this case. So it won't be in evidence. But can you put aside what you heard about that there was a settlement?
Yeah.
All right. And one of our questions, number 10 in part 1, asks in a very long, wordy way, my fault, can you be fair and impartial? And you said yes. Do you still feel, based on everything you may have heard, that your answer would still be yes?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. little hesitation, or are you just kind of thinking to make sure?
I'm just kind of thinking, it was a while ago. So, but
Right.
I do feel the same, I would say.
Okay. And specifically with regard to the hearing about the settlement, is that kind of the needle? You're at fair and impartial right in the middle. Does that move it one way or the other?
It definitely wouldn't. It would move it probably more towards impartial, I would think. Like I said, I don't know exactly what the settlement's all about.
Right.
At first thought, I thought that it had something to do with this case. I wasn't really aware that it wasn't.
Okay.
But yeah, I guess it wouldn't move the needle too dramatically either way.
Either way. Okay. Generally, what you've heard about the case, before the questionnaire, after the questionnaire, as a juror, you have to put all that aside, disregard it, and any opinions you may have about the case, about the facts of the case. Some people have seen so much or have opinions so entrenched that they don't feel they can do that and just decide the case on the facts, the evidence that you hear in court, and the law that I give you. Where are you on that? Do you think you can?
The video and everything that I saw over the summer definitely did affect me in a lot of ways. I was very active in what went on after that.
Okay.
And it definitely did affect me in a way that I can't easily put aside.
Okay.
I know that's kind of goes against being fair and impartial, but
Well, actually, let me change the question a little bit.
Okay.
Every juror tries to be fair and impartial. I've never met one in my 14 years on the bench who does not try to be fair and impartial. But we have to push you and say, based on what you know about this case and that, can you, yes or no, be fair and impartial? And it's not a failure if you say yes. It's not a failure if you say no. It's just what it is.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of given that, as opposed to can you try, ultimately, knowing yourself, can you be?
I would give it my best. I would be probably leaning more towards lying if I said that I could for sure be fair and impartial.
Okay.
Like I said, everything that I saw over the summer, it really did affect me, and I'm not 100% sure on that. I could try, I guess is what I'm saying, but I honestly could not give you a definitive answer if I really could be.
All right. All right. I'm going to excuse you from this jury. I appreciate your honesty and willing to look inside. It's not a failure. The only failure would be if you didn't tell me the truth, and you obviously have told me the truth. So
Okay.
I'm going to release you from service on this jury. In fact, you're released from all jury service.
Okay.
We're not going to put you on another case. So.
All right.
All right. Deputy will take some paperwork from you, and thank you for your time, both in the questionnaire and here in court today.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, juror 131. 130 is for cause of the state's motion, or on the court's motion. 131. All right, come on up and have a seat, please. Good morning.
Morning.
You are juror 131, correct?
Yes.
All right. A couple things before I turn you over to the attorneys. First of all, I'm going to swear you in because all your answers have to be under oath. So if you could raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that you will truthfully answer all questions about your qualifications to serve as a juror?
Yes.
All right. A couple things as far as the layout here. We have plexiglass between us and plexiglass in front of us, plexiglass in front of the lawyers lectern where they'll be asking you questions. Plus, they're a bit of a distance away. Given that whole setup, and I'll continue to wear a mask, I want you to feel comfortable if you want to leave your mask on or to remove it while you're being questioned. So if at any time you just want to take it off, feel free. If you take it off and want to put it back on, feel free. In either case. But whether you have a mask on or off, I would ask that you pull a little closer to the microphone so that we can hear you nice and loud. And I'm sure that'll be fine. So don't worry. I'll adjust you if necessary.
Okay.
First of all, you filled out a questionnaire, and thank you for doing so. It gave us a lot of good information to start with. Is everything on that questionnaire true that you recall?
Yes.
When the lawyers are asking you questions, they will focus you on specific questions, and they'll probably read the question and the answer, not to be confrontational, but just to remind you what your answer was.
Sure.
And I want you to feel comfortable giving a different answer, giving additional information, or even a different opinion, because opinions evolve. Since you filled out the questionnaire, you may have thought about other things that you should have put in. Don't worry about it being different from what's in the questionnaire. That's the bottom line, okay?
Okay.
Now, one of the things the questionnaire advised you is not to read any articles, and to avoid the media about this case. But we understand, again, it's been a few months since you filled out the questionnaire. Are there things, because the coverage is so extensive, that you may have been exposed to? A headline, a news blurb, a friend talking about new developments, anything like that, whether this case or related cases, pretrial matters, anything.
I came across the headline of the civil settlement there with the city and the Floyd family.
Okay. And how do you think that would affect your decision in this case?
I don't think it would affect it. I mean, they are separate matters entirely, so I don't think it would come up.
All right, and it won't. I'll just tell you that. It's not a part of this case. It's different case, different legal issues, different parties, different decision-making process.
Sure.
So you think you can put it aside?
Yes.
Question 10 in part 1 of the questionnaire asks if you could be fair and impartial. And you said yes. Does hearing about this settlement move the needle, so to speak? If you're right in the middle on impartial, does it move it one way or the other for you?
No.
All right. Any other information you may have been exposed to since you filled out the questionnaire about this case? Again, pretrial matters, question parties, anything?
No.
All right. Excellent. Bottom line on that is you have to decide this case just on what you hear in the courtroom. Put aside everything you've heard, and everybody's heard something about the case and have certain opinions based on what they've heard and seen and generally. Can you put aside those opinions and what you may have heard outside the courtroom and decide this case just on the law that I give you applied to the evidence that you hear only in this courtroom?
Yes.
All right. Easier question. Did you recognize any of the witnesses on the list that we gave you?
No.
Okay. And we estimate this trial be a month long starting on Monday. Can you make that work personally and professionally?
Yes. The only thing I would add is that I will be moving out of state at the end of May, so if that timeline changes to the right, it could be a little tricky. But at least for the next 4 weeks, like you said, would be fine.
I think the 4-week estimate is pretty good. It may get longer. As you've seen, there can be delays.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, you're going to have a really cranky judge if we're still in trial at the end of May. So I think it's a safe bet that you should be able to do that without a problem.
Okay.
Even our giving some leeway to both sides presenting their cases, I think we'll be fine if it's the end of May.
Okay.
Other than that, anything that you thought you should bring up before I turn you over to the lawyers?
No, that was the only matter.
Okay. Then as to juror number 131, Mr. Nelson, you may inquire.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for your patience this morning, and thank you for taking the time to fill out your questionnaire. I have a few questions just kind of generally to get to know you a little better, and then I'm going to ask you some follow-up questions on your responses to the questionnaire.
Okay.
So let's start kind of basic. You and I meet for the first time in some other circumstance, a party, a social event, whatever it may be, and we have our first conversation. What are a few things I'm going to learn about you during that conversation?
You would learn I'm married. I have a young puppy at home. Competitive person, so I follow a lot of different sports, play sports myself. So this past weekend was obviously pretty exciting with the bracket. My teams didn't do well, but it was exciting watching. So I think you would learn those things for sure.
Okay. And I understand you're like an accountant by trade?
Correct.
Okay. Again, we're not trying to name where you work, but pretty busy time of year for you?
Not really. Things have slowed down since all the filings from like 12/31.
Okay. Good. And I think there was an extension on taxes or for personal filing too?
Outside my area of expertise.
Okay. Good. So you'd obviously heard about this case before you received your jury summons, right?
Correct.
And at some point you learned that you were a potential juror in this particular case. What was your initial reaction to that?
A bit of shock, I would say.
Why shock?
Just given the size of Hennepin County, I didn't really think that I would be selected. The probability was fairly low.
Okay. The numbers analysis, right?
Yep.
Did you have concerns for your personal safety, your private, family life, anything of that nature, COVID?
No.
Okay. When you got to the government center this morning and saw kind of its current condition in terms of, military and fencing and things of that nature, how did that make you feel?
It's a bit intimidating, to be honest, but it was fine. Everyone's been really friendly that I've come across.
Okay. Why do you use the word intimidating?
Well, you have multiple barriers there. There were quite a few armed officers and what appeared to be National Guard there at the entrance, so it's quite a bit of show of force.
Okay. Does that have an impact on how you would view this case one way or another?
No.
Okay. When you learned that we were trying to protect people's anonymity, how did that make you feel?
Good.
Okay.
So,
At some point when the judge determines it's safe to do so, your name, if you were a juror on this case, would be released publicly. How do you feel about that?
I understand it's part of the process. I don't like it as much, but I understand it's part of the process.
Okay. Again, anything about that, dislike that would impact your ability to be fair and impartial in this case?
No.
All right. Can you think of a situation, whether it be in your personal or private life or your professional or private life, where you have been called upon to resolve a conflict between two people or a dispute?
Yeah, I mean, a couple times probably at work.
Okay. And when you are kind of called upon in that role to do that or to perform that role, what tools, what's your approach to that?
Well, I'd say my approach would be to make sure I'm understanding what the conflict is first and foremost. So asking any sort of probing or clarifying questions to make sure I understand kind of what the root is of the conflict, and then make sure I hear kind of both sides and determine what are the facts from both sides, and then based on my experience and maybe whatever else I can research and opinions I can help advise and come to a resolution there or compromise, whatever the case may be.
Okay. Obviously, you understand that this involves, kind of large-scale conflict between the state of Minnesota and Mr. Chauvin, but also within the jury room there may be disputes that arise. Would you employ that same process in the jury room?
Yes.
Okay. Do you think it changes the analysis if you are on one side of a dispute or not?
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. Well, I'll rephrase it. How's that?
Okay.
rather than being called upon to resolve the dispute, you're a party to the dispute. How do you're disagreeing with someone else.
Yeah.
How do you try to resolve that?
Well, I would think I would try to approach it rationally and state the facts and try to stick to it there and then kind of see where that goes and leads to see what dialogue that brings up.
Okay. And would you be willing to re-examine your own perspective?
Yes.
At the same time, if you felt it was such a critical issue, would you agree for the purposes of agreement, or would you stand your ground?
Stand my ground.
Okay. How do you approach the analysis of determining whether someone is telling you the truth or not?
I would say kind of you can read a little bit into the person as far as like body language is concerned and eye contact and whatnot, from just like subtle clues. And then I'd say just try to think through it rationally if they're telling the truth or not, to try to determine credibility.
Okay. Do you think that two people can observe a situation from literally standing right next to each other and they may perceive it differently?
Yes.
And what factors do you think would affect someone's perception of an event?
I would say, I mean, it depends on a variety of factors, but like what would you call it, like a traumatizing event or something like that? I mean, people always suppress certain things, and even like as you're remembering certain situations, there could be like gaps and whatnot.
Okay. Do you think that a person's, say, training or experience or education may impact how they perceive an event?
Yes.
Right. And, in your professional life, you may view a financial decision differently than someone else, right?
Could be, yes. I would like to think that it'd be a little more objective there financially if you're sticking more to the numbers, but you could, yes.
Do you think that, again, ultimately, if you have two people seeing the same event and they have different life experiences or different training or, different experiences with trauma, for example, that it doesn't necessarily mean that they're lying about an event? And if so, how do you determine which person's side to give more credence to?
Yes, I would say that could happen. I wouldn't say that they would be lying, but maybe there's, missing pieces or things that they don't remember or didn't see, like you said. We're all human. We don't perceive and see the event all the same way. And so I would tend to try to determine kind of what's the truth, is just think through it rationally and try to piece it together myself to determine what really happened.
Okay. Can you think of a situation in your life where you were 100% certain of something, only later to learn you were wrong?
More of like a less serious example, but I mean, last week playing tennis, you think the score is one thing, and then your partner or others on the court tell you it's something else. And so just talk through, what were the sequence of events beforehand to lead you to the score line and come to the right answer there.
Okay. I mean, so when I know that's a less significant kind of a example, but
Sure.
I think it's a good example. When something like that happens, I mean, do you readily admit that you're wrong, or do you continue to fight your position?
Just talk through it, I would say, and just try to determine, like in that example, we just talked through it and talked through the sequence of events, and then realized that I was wrong in that case, and changed my opinion. And in this case, moved over to the other side of the court.
All right. Now, your job as a juror is to listen to all of the evidence, to only the evidence that's presented in court, and at the end of the case, the judge will give you rules of law that would apply. You may read those rules of law, and you may think to yourself, this can't possibly be right, this can't possibly be the law, or I think we need to change this law. Can you apply the law as the judge gives it to you, even if you disagree with it or think it should be changed?
Yes.
No hesitation. I mean, I'm assuming, again, in your professional life, you're used to kind of interpreting law
Correct.
as it applies to financial transactions.
Correct.
All right. Let me just follow up with a few questions on your questionnaire, sir. Again, thank you for taking the time to fill this out. It's helpful. Before I get into it, I want to just make sure there's a video that's referenced, I think, in your answers as well as in some of the questions. And I want to make sure, because several videos have become public. There was a bystander video that went viral and became a news story. There were some body cameras, and there were some store surveillance cameras that have all entered kind of the public dialogue. Which of those videos have you seen?
Just the bystander one. I think it's only one angle.
Okay. And I think you estimated that you just saw that one time.
Mm-hmm.
And
Correct.
by that, did you go and watch the entire video or did you see just one news clip about it?
I've never seen the whole video. It's only been maybe 30 seconds or so.
Okay. So maybe scrolling through social media, through Facebook, and you see a few seconds of it, or seeing it in the TV news or something like that?
Yep.
Okay. A couple of questions. The first question asks you to kind of just, again, recite what you recall. You remembered that a number of former officers held down George Floyd while Derek Chauvin in particular knelt on George Floyd's neck. Their restraint lasted for approximately 5 to 10 minutes. Kind of a general recitation of what you remembered, correct?
Correct.
And ultimately, you also remembered that the initial autopsy said George Floyd did not die from suffocation, but a different autopsy came to a different conclusion. Again, the question being is, you may or may not hear evidence about different medical opinions. Again, based on your role as a juror, can you set aside everything that you may have heard beforehand and focus exclusively on the evidence as it's presented in court?
Yes.
You were asked about your impression of the defendant, Mr. Chauvin, and you indicated that you had a somewhat negative impression. You wrote, "While I do not have all the facts of the case, it seems like it would not have taken 4 officers to respond to a call regarding a counterfeit bill, and that the restraint of George Floyd for 5 to 10 minutes may have been unnecessary." So I guess the question is have you formed an opinion about the use of force in this case? As to whether it was unreasonable, reasonable, based on what you've seen?
Well, what I put in there was accurate. I mean, I think the duration was a bit, like I said, unnecessary.
Okay.
Or 5 to 10 minutes, whatever the exact number is.
So it's another way of saying you formed an opinion that it was an unnecessary use of force, right?
For that duration of time.
Okay. Focusing specifically on the duration.
Correct.
All right. Now, if you were a juror in this case, you understand that police practices, police policies, that may be an issue in this case. Do you understand that?
Yes.
And you're not a police officer, right?
No.
Okay. Have you ever received any specific training about how particularly the Minneapolis Police Department trains their police officers?
No.
Would you be able to set aside your opinion as to the duration of the restraint, listen to the evidence as it's presented in court, and formulate a verdict based on the evidence?
Yes.
You were asked about your opinion of Mr. Floyd, and you wrote that you had a neutral impression, and you wrote, "I do not know a lot about him apart from what was written on the previous page, that he was a middle-aged African-American with kids living in the Twin Cities." So you have no impression or have formed no opinion as to Mr. Floyd.
Correct.
Good. You were asked about whether you've ever talked about Mr. Floyd's death with your family, friends, or coworkers, or discussed it online, for example, on social media, and you checked the box yes. So I'm going to parse this out a little bit. Have you ever shared or expressed an opinion online through social media?
No.
But you wrote, at work, we discussed what we can do both personally and as an organization to help end racism, and I voiced a desire to educate myself on the subject, starting with reading a book. I have not expressed any opinions on George Floyd's death on social media. Sorry, I guess I missed that there the first time. So obviously you recognize this started a dialogue amongst people, right?
Yes.
And again, your opinions, the opinions you may have formed, or your organization's kind of discussions, you set all of that aside. Can you do that?
Yes.
Will you do that?
Yes.
All right. You were asked whether or not the community has been negatively or positively affected by any of the protests that have taken place in the Twin Cities since Mr. Floyd's death, and you wrote negatively affected. Can you explain why?
Well, like we just talked about, the dialogue at the beginning to start talking about racism and other topics, I think is great. And then when the dialogue started shifting towards kind of the looting aspect of various targets and burning of the precincts and whatnot, I think kind of the message gets lost, and so I would say kind of shifted more towards negatively impacting the community and small business owners and whatnot.
On one of the pages, there were a variety of statements, kind of broad, generalized statements, and you were asked to rank your opinion, I guess, on some of those statements. Do you recall that exercise?
Yes.
And I know you may not remember every single thing that was asked or what you circled, so I just want to talk about a couple of them with you. The statement reads, blacks and other minorities do not receive equal treatment as whites in the criminal justice system, and you somewhat agreed with that. What do you base your opinion on regarding the treatment of blacks and other minorities within the criminal justice system?
Statistically speaking, what I've read is that minorities are incarcerated more frequently and for longer sentences for similar crimes as their white peers. So
Okay.
I couldn't necessarily pinpoint why that would be, but it seems to point to that they're not quite treated equally.
Okay, so you've read some studies or articles focusing on the statistical, again, mathematical analysis.
Correct.
Okay. The statement reads, police in my community make me feel safe, and you strongly agreed with that.
Yes.
And you strongly disagreed with the notion of defunding, the Minneapolis Police Department.
Yes.
Do you have personal experiences that shape why you think that police are there to keep you safe?
Not necessarily personal experiences, but I believe the police force is a necessary and integral part of our society.
Okay. With respect to one statement, you asked, or you were asked this: Minneapolis police officers are more likely to respond with force when confronting black suspects than with dealing with white suspects, and you somewhat agreed with that. What did you base your opinion on there?
Maybe not necessarily to Minneapolis. I haven't read as many cases, but I mean, you've kind of seen what happens in Atlanta and other places around the United States that seems to suggest that would be the case.
Okay. So your response would not just be limited to the Minneapolis Police Department.
Correct.
And I guess following up on that is, you have a respect for law enforcement, and this case obviously involves the Minneapolis Police Department. Would you accept a police officer's testimony with greater credibility than a citizen's or bystander or an observer, simply by virtue of the fact that they are police officers?
I think it would depend on the topic. So if we talked about earlier, like police training or something like that, where there would be more of a subject matter expert in that case, I would put more credibility to them. But just because they wear a badge, not necessarily.
All right. So if a police officer and a citizen are observing the same event, right, taking it out of an area of expertise, would you automatically assign greater credibility to the police officer by virtue of the fact he's a police officer?
No.
You were asked a series of questions about your opinion on Black Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter. You had a somewhat favorable impression of Black Lives Matter and a neutral opinion or impression as to Blue Lives Matter. You wrote, I support the black community's fight against racism and inequality, but have not always agreed with the tactics employed by the Black Lives Matter movement. Is there something in specific, like do you assign Black Lives Matter responsibility for the protests, or I should say the riots that occurred after Mr. Floyd's death?
Maybe a certain degree. I know that the frustration, has spilled over into certain areas, so I can understand kind of how it boiled to that point, but yeah, to a certain extent.
And wrote, with respect to Blue Lives Matter, you wrote, I support our police departments who provide a valuable and dangerous services to our community. However, I think the Blue Lives Matter movement has not done enough to enhance the conversation on equality and other issues such as gun control. Right. So I think again, you respect law enforcement, is that fair to say?
Yes.
But you don't assign them more believability or weight simply by virtue of the fact that they're police.
Yes.
You have a relative through marriage who is a physician, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you were to be hearing medical opinions or medical evidence in this case, would you call that relative and ask for his or her opinion?
No.
Lastly, you were asked, do you want to serve as a juror in this case? And you wrote, not sure. You wrote, I am willing to perform my civic duty as a juror in this case. If selected, I do not have a preference. So it's,
Right.
you strike me as a fairly analytical person. Is that the same analysis or that same analytical kind of tendency that you would apply if you were a juror in this case?
Yes.
And again, focusing only on the evidence as it's presented in court.
Yes.
You can do that.
Yes.
And you would do that.
Yes.
May I have a moment, Your Honor?
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, sir.
Morning.
So what kind of puppy?
He's a Bernese Mountain Dog, almost 6 months old now.
Okay. Now, you've described yourself as being an analytical person. You're an accountant, correct?
Yeah.
Make rational decisions.
Try to.
So explain the rationale of getting a puppy.
My wife and I always wanted one, so we don't have kids, but we wanted to have a dog first, and so felt like the right time. We're working from home for the foreseeable future anyway, so could create some separation anxiety problems down the road, but felt like the right time to do it.
As you know, you're gonna have to feed it and take care of it, and it's gonna do absolutely nothing for you, right?
Yep.
Okay. All right. You also mentioned that you're into sports and you're currently watching some basketball.
Yes.
You also watch football?
Yes.
You still watch football? Did you watch the Super Bowl last year?
Yes.
Sometimes during sporting events, certain players will make political statements. For example, take a knee during the national anthem. Have you seen that?
Yes.
Describe how you feel about that when you see someone do that.
I would prefer if someone would express their beliefs in a different manner, but I understand kind of what they're trying to do and raise the dialogue on certain issues.
Mm-hmm. And how so? How would you prefer that they express their opinion?
In a different manner, not during the national anthem?
What is it about the playing of the national anthem that you wish they would just kind of leave that alone? What is it about that?
I think it's more of a respect for those that have come before us and kind of the system that we have here in the United States, and feel a great sense of pride in being a United States citizen. And so see people not stand up and kind of remove their hats and be courteous to it. I would just prefer a different method for those to kind of get their message across.
You indicated that you read a book after a company-sponsored dialogue about racism. Is that right? What book was it that you read?
I don't remember offhand, to be honest.
Did you finish the book?
Got most of the way through.
Okay. Do you remember any general impressions or anything that you got out of reading this book?
It's been a while. Nothing's jumping out at me at the moment.
You indicated that you believe that the protests kind of devolved into rioting and that had a negative impact on the community. Is that right?
Yes.
And you somewhat ascribe the organization Black Lives Matter to the rioting and looting.
What was the question?
You believe that Black Lives Matter is responsible for the rioting and looting?
I don't know if I would necessarily describe it as responsible.
Okay. How would you describe it?
Like I said, kind of the frustration kind of boiled over to do more of the rioting. So I wouldn't say that the Black Lives Matter movement was responsible, but perhaps was a contributing factor.
Mm-hmm. And just based on your own observations, would you be able to pick out any group more than any other group that could have been responsible for rioting and looting that took place?
Are you asking for the specific groups I think would be responsible?
Yes, or if you think any other groups aside from Black Lives Matter could be responsible.
Well, I would say, maybe an unpopular opinion, but police force, I don't know if necessarily did also a great job at de-escalating some of the situations.
And you use that term de-escalating. What do you mean by that? What do you think the police could have done better, I guess, in what followed, the initial protests and then when there was rioting and looting?
Not quite sure exactly what they could have done, but perhaps just something different would have been a more prudent approach.
You strongly disagree with the concept of defunding the Minneapolis Police Department. Can you just share with me a little bit about your opinions on that concept, what it means to you, and why you disagree with it?
Yeah. Well, like I said earlier, I think they provide a valuable service to our society. And so I don't agree with, defunding. I think, if we want to have a dialogue about perhaps shifting some of the different funds to different areas, I think that would be, like a good conversation to have. But as far as like actually cutting funding for certain programs within the police department, I don't agree with that.
So would it be fair to say that you believe that where other programs maybe should receive additional funding, you would not support cutting funding from the police because you believe that they're essential?
Yeah.
And then on the issue of your opinion of Blue Lives Matter, you said that you think that Blue Lives Matter movement has not done enough to change the conversation on equality and other issues such as gun control. Can you explain what you would like to have seen Blue Lives Matter do about conversations of equality or gun control?
Well, I think you often see that there are like two different spectrums. You have like the Blue Lives Matter clashing against kind of the Black Lives Matter. And so I think that, both sides, instead of being more confrontational, I guess you could say, would have more like open dialogue about what they could really do to bridge some of the like frustration and things that are happening in our society.
Take more of a practical approach as opposed to an advocacy approach. Would that be fair?
Yep.
And then in terms of your attitudes toward the criminal justice system, you indicated you believe there's room for improvement, particularly in corrections, and that there should be more closely aligning punishment with the crime, better support for proper rehabilitation. Can you tell me a little bit about how you've come to those conclusions?
Yeah, and this is more kind of what I've read from statistics, is that, once some folks are incarcerated, I don't remember the number, but it's higher than others that they will return to prison. And so I think there's some sort of gap there in the rehabilitation then to our society. And so I don't necessarily know what the right answer is to improve that, but that would be kind of an area where I think there could be improvement.
One moment, Your Honor. We'll pass for cause, Your Honor.
Juror 131, you will be on our jury. We'll have your report Monday at 9 a.m. You're also going to get probably a letter or other communications from the jury office on logistics and specifics regarding that. So the deputy will take something from you, but otherwise keep that letter that got you in here today and bring it on Monday. All right? Any questions?
What time did you say?
9 a.m.
Okay.
So that's when we're going to start. So, but you'll get a letter with more logistics from the jury office,
Okay.
as far as where and how to report and that type of thing. All right?
Okay.
All right. Thank you. You may go with the deputy.
Thank you.
All right. We have 15. Obviously, just to reiterate, 14 will be seated. That's all we have room for. We could seat 15 if we had room, but 15th juror, as the last chosen, will be excused on Monday of the other 14. The whole point of this 15th juror was to make sure that we have 14 people show up on Monday. Nevertheless, I'm still not going to release the jury pool until the jury is sworn, on the off chance that we still have to pick some alternates. But I'm hopeful that since it's only a few days, that we'll have 14 people show up, and those 14 will be seated and sworn, and we'll proceed with opening statements at that time. Anything else for the record from the state?
No, thank you, Your Honor. No, Your Honor.
All right, we are in recess until Monday, March 29th at 9 a.m. Thank you.